Studio 33 AD, bringing you Catholic media.
Jesus Christ is King of the universe. There can be no doubt for us Christians. It's one of the basic beliefs that we profess to. Say, Jesus is Lord. The person, Jesus Christ, the man, God the Son, who became flesh, is King of the universe. It's a prerequisite. If you don't believe in that, do not pass go, do not collect $200. And naturally, being King of the universe brings with it certain prerogatives, as you can imagine, as any position of authority does, including, as we just heard in our passage from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, the right to judge all people, all nations, all individuals at the end of time to determine whether in justice and mercy they should spend eternity with God, the angels, and the saints, and with Jesus himself, or in their own selfishness with the devil and his angels. Once again, this comes, or it should come, as no surprise to us. It's a basic Christian belief, heaven and hell. It's been there since the beginning. It's been there since Christ. So with that in mind, since we believe in heaven and hell, I think it's pretty important that we know what the criteria are for getting to heaven and not hell, right? That's pretty basic, pretty important. And that's where the going gets a little bit more interesting. The Gospels present us with different images of what that might look like. There's no single image presented to us. Consider this. Today we heard from the Gospel of Matthew, as we have been all year. This is the last Sunday of the year of the Gospel of Matthew. And what are the criteria given? Pretty straightforward, actually. Feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, welcome the stranger, clothe the naked, care for the ill, visit those in prison. It's pretty simple, actually. According to this passage, if you take it at face value, those who go to heaven will be those who minister to King Jesus in the form of the poor and the most forgotten. So what is it then? How do you get to heaven? Well, this passage read alone says it's your work. It's what you do. It's what's manifested in your actions. You can say anything you want, but if you can't back it up, it doesn't matter. So those who go to heaven are those who do what is righteous. Straightforward, right? But let me mix it up a little bit. What about the Gospel of Luke? We didn't hear that today. That's something we hear every 3 years, certainly not this year. What passage do we read for Christ the King from the Gospel of Luke on that year? Well, I think you all would know it. And when I say the good thief, the man who was crucified next to Christ and repented of his sins at the last moment. And Jesus said to him, "Today you will be with me in paradise." I think we're all familiar with that, or hopefully we are. And we see in the good thief an example of someone who relies not on his own works whatsoever, right? Not on his own actions whatsoever, but rather in his faith in Christ. He believes in the words that Jesus says to him, "Today you will be with me." And it's true. If Jesus says it, indeed, we believe him to be in paradise. And that's why he's called Saint Dismas now by the church. So the message from the Gospel of Luke seems to be then, those who go to heaven are those who believe in Jesus Christ. Those who have put their trust in him and not in their own works. There's nothing that we can do to offer to him that has not already been given to us as a gift in the first place. So those who are saved are those who have faith in Christ, who have trust in Christ. Once again, very simple on its own accord. So which one is it then? Is it faith? Is it what you believe? Or is it works and actions? Is it what you do? It's not a new question, actually, in the history of the church. A lot of people have tried to answer it. That's what theologians do with their spare time. And we had one attempt at it in the 400s AD by a monk named Pelagius. And he just basically had the idea if you work really hard, if you just do a lot of good things, then you can get to heaven on your own accord. No saving faith, just works, just what you do. Proof's in the pudding. And then on the other extreme, several centuries later, something you might be more familiar with because we live in a cultural milieu that's saturated by it, the Protestant Reformation came along. We had Martin Luther, John Calvin, and friends saying, sola fide. It's only your faith that saves you. They made a division between what human beings can do and God's saving grace. So there are no saving works, only saving faith. And initially, on the face of it, each of these has a clarity that's really refreshing and easy to understand. It's very clear what you're supposed to do. But then we remember, which gospel should we throw out? The Gospel of Matthew or the Gospel of Luke? The sheep and the goats or the good thief? And of course, as Catholics, we keep them both. They're both in our Bible. Perhaps there's a way we can understand these passages in a way that makes sense of both of them. Might it be the case that both are mysteriously necessary for our salvation, and that both, in fact, when done correctly, are actually intertwined at the seams, cannot be taken apart from each other? Maybe two sides of the same coin? Let's put those goggles on, see how they fit. First, let's go back to the Gospel of Matthew, which we heard from today. What happens when we read the passage a little more carefully than we did the first time through? We see the actions, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, etc. They're acts, sure, they're things that are done, but they're acts of faith. They're acts of faith. They're not done to just anyone. They're done to Christ himself. Even though the sheep are trying to bless the poor and the less fortunate among us, who they end up blessing is Christ, the King of the universe, not just anyone. And so therefore it's ultimately Christ who saves them and no one else. He does not tell them he's saving them because they've done more good things than they have bad, or that they've met a certain kind of quota and passed the bar, or their scale tipped in the right direction. He saves them because purely out of his gratuitous grace, he's going to honor their finite righteousness with an infinite response of mercy. It's not justice, it's mercy. It is only the mercy of God that makes this whole interaction possible in the first place. And this is true of the passage of the good thief as well. At first, the only thing we see is that he's guaranteed a place in paradise, the same day, purely, it seems like, out of Jesus' mercy. But there's actually more to the story there, too. The good thief, unlike the bad thief, who we forget about, has decided to accept the excruciating, literally, circumstances that he finds himself in. He's literally being crucified when he says this, when he makes this request. So while it's a sort of passive reception, it is still a choice. It's still an action. It's still something that he does to accept the suffering that is in his life. He's choosing to do something with his faith. So we see that his faith is not an empty one, not faith alone, but one in which his actions back up what he believes to the extent that they can. So I think this is the hallmark of true faith and true works. True faith is also an act, a request, a choice to ask the King for mercy. True works are rooted in faith and otherwise are pointless. The idea that Jesus will have the mercy to respond to our little tiny things with a totally unmerited gift of forgiveness and salvation. Both are necessary for salvation, and both are, in fact, intertwined. And each of us is capable of growing in these two things because they go together. And you have to ask yourself, which one do I need to work on? Some of you, faith comes very naturally. I meet people, they just have always believed in God, and they can't imagine doing otherwise. They find it very easy to be Catholic. Sometimes they don't even know why, but they know, I believe, right? But then actually carrying it out, that can be a difficult thing for some people. Those same people who have that very strong faith, that natural intuitive faith, they don't always follow up on it, do they? And then the reverse is true for others. Some people are very good people in a sense. They're very motivated to help the poor. They're very motivated to help out and volunteer at church. But they're very unsure about the dogmas, the doctrines of the faith, which are revealed by God himself through the church. And they struggle with this idea that we need to believe every little thing that the Catholic Church teaches in faith and morals. And so ask yourself, where do I fall in this? Where do I fall on the spectrum? All of us have deficits and ways in which we need to grow in this particular facet of the Christian life. So I would ask you, ask God for the one that you need. Ask God for the grace of faith, or ask God for the grace of carrying out that faith, works. I think that God will honor your request just as he honored the sheep who sought to do his will, and the good thief who knew that the mercy of God would bring him into paradise. A good king would do nothing less.